It is June 11th here. Obviously, Fathom Nickel released some news today, and we got CEO Ian Fraser of Fathom. It's been a while since we did one of these. I guess I will turn the floor over to Ian here pretty quickly. This is meant to be sort of investor-driven Q&A, right? Letting your kind of questions that you got in ahead of time dictate the conversation and the flow. Thanks for everybody joining here. There's quite a bit of news for us to get through here. Lots of kind of developments and lots of news since the last time I sat down with Ian. But Ian, I guess maybe I will just turn the floor over to you now. And you had some news out today about some land acquisition and then a VTEM Plus survey previously, and then obviously a whole host and a large batch of news prior to that we'll get through. And I do have this sort of, and people that got your questions in on CEO and elsewhere, I have these in here already, so don't worry about that, pretty much verbatim. But before I start kind of peppering Ian with questions, I'll just let Ian have the floor and maybe just, he can start us off and we'll take it from there, Ian. So yeah, thanks everyone. And thank you, Ian. And we'll get after it here.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthew. Excuse me. Thanks for setting this up. I always look forward to these events. With respect to disclaimers, I am sharing the screen here, so this is pretty standard. Through this conversation, I'm sure there will be forward-looking statements. Saying, right, we're not going to read it word for word. That's been said. That is the norm before any technical presentations I give. So the news out this morning, we're continuing to wear our nickel hat. Gochager, I think, is developing into a very, very intriguing prospect. We're recognizing things now that we did not recognize when we first started early in 2023. But the greater area is immediately to the south. The folks that own the now under care and maintenance Bingo gold mine, the Royaloid mine, they are dewatering it. There is renewed gold activity in the Larange Greenstone belt. There's been some mergers and some acquisitions, and Ross McElroy is coming back into the fold. So it's an exciting time to be exploring in Saskatchewan. And again, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the one real advantage we have in Saskatchewan is, ironically and strangely in a lot of ways, it remains very underexplored for base metals, for gold, and definitely not for uranium. That just continues to be a tremendous focus in the province. But, there's an awful lot of other good things going on in light of some of the activity, and we're in the game. We were certainly went a little quiet there for a period of time. You got to be able to take the punches in this business, and we've been able to put some money back in the treasury, and looking forward to continue to do what we do. And I guess, as stated in the last two press releases, we are not ignoring gold potential in our properties. And we're not ignoring gold potential in Saskatchewan. We've been approached. We're looking at gold opportunities in the province of Saskatchewan and potentially elsewhere. It's just something that, as a junior explorer, you need to keep all avenues open. And having said that, you can't lose focus. There's there's numerous instances out there where people have changed their name because it was the thing to do. And there's in a lot of cases, it does not work out for the best. So having said that, I'd just like to, sort of emphasize that we haven't lost our focus. We believe that the Albert Lake, Gochager Lake, Friesen properties are part of a nickel district within a much broader nickel camp, which is the Trans-Hudson orogeny. And I continue to ask the question, why can't you have a Thompson nickel belt in the province of Saskatchewan? And I'm determined to prove that we can find something similar.
So no, we will take some time. Thank you, Ian. Yeah, we will absolutely take some time to kind of delve backwards a bit and look through sort of the last 6 months in terms of what did or didn't happen, et cetera, et cetera. But I just think it's fair, for in kind of a good faith approach for Ian to let him have a chance to talk about the most recent two news releases, right? Sort of the lights are coming back on, and the engine's getting fired up here a bit. You can see from Fathom, and so yeah, we will kind of cast our eyes back. But Ian, maybe if you can move from your your disclaimer there and give the good audience here something a bit more interesting to look at than that word salad. But yeah, I guess, no, Ian, do you want to continue there? But I mean, I guess the question would be, I mean, why don't we just start with today, right? With land acquisition, staking to the east, you've expanded Gochager. I mean, I have specific questions as follow-ups, but maybe just I'll let you, why don't you just kind of give us the Coles notes, and then I'll hit you with a couple of follow-up questions about what's going on here.
Right. Okay. Well, with respect to the news release this morning, and let me just touch on the very bottom bullet here. We were planning on mobilizing crews last week to the Gochager Lake project. Our camp has been built. It's ready to go. We had some folks in there doing some final touches in anticipation of our arrival. And then the fire situation around L'Orange itself, I mean, it just whipped up in like no time at all. It was certainly something that was being monitored, and before you knew it, it was right smack on the town. I was informed yesterday that the evacuation notice is going to be lifted as of Thursday, so things will be coming back into, the town will get itself back on track. But there was just no way that we were going to be an added burden to what was going on in northern Saskatchewan by having people out in the field and locals concerned about families and evacuations and all that sort of stuff. So we put the brakes on initiating the Gochager Lake field program, and there will be news around that once we get closer to finalizing our new go date. Yeah, and then so there was, certainly a comment in today's press release about the wildfires in L'Orange. So, in the background, we continue to, as my preamble, we're continuing to look at opportunities within our own properties in light of, $3,500 gold. We continue to go through all available data and just expand our overall knowledge at Gochager, and in the process, lands became available, and so we staked them. And we'll continue to keep our eyes open for what we feel is prospective territory, because we do have sorry, Matthew, I might be going a little off course, but going back to the previous press release, I did want to mention I was in error stating that we were the largest landholder in the region. That is not correct. That is certainly Rottenstone Gold that has come in and completely surrounded not only Ramp, but ourselves. So, from Gochager all the way to the very top end of Albert Lake, we are completely engulfed by Rottenstone Gold. So I correct myself. That was a point in the previous news release in error. Yeah, so again, we've had the luxury of looking at historic VTEM data, and we've had, this goes back before we even put boots on the ground at Gochager. We were able to take the 2008 VTEM and strip it down and look at it from a lithostructural perspective, and we have our consultants defined this corridor that is a large regional shear going through our current land dispositions, and the Gochager Lake deposit falls immediately within that particular shear zone, quote unquote. I'm going to call it a conduit, so you need some sort of mechanism to allow these magmas to get up into the crust in the first place. And the work that we've done post the recommendations of this corridor, our geochemical work and various other things, are mapping within these what were predetermined boundaries. So that makes us feel pretty good that we have now recognized an expanded playing field for magmatic nickel, copper, sulfide type deposits. And then certainly to the south of the Gochager trend, maybe I'll just pull up the map that was part of today's press release, the Boris Lake VMS trend. There is a non-compliant resource that was developed there around zinc, lead, and silver. It does have all the markings of a classic VMS type of setting. There is I think some of the conductivity that we recognize along this trend is the result of pyrrhotite and pyrite, pyrrhotite being the cause of the conductivity. And typically in these VMS systems, you can imagine these smokers pumping out all these metals on the seafloor. You get this cap. And so having seen this long regional trend of complex and multiple conductors, we're a bit of a broad brush approach here, but we're mapping out what we think is a very, very fertile trend for VMS style of mineralization. And as we know, I mean, it already exists. So ultimately, there's a, if you follow commodities, I think zinc is very, very quietly moving along and coming up in terms of metals that people are paying interest to. And of course, with zinc and lead, typically you get silver. We don't really know where the copper may be in this VMS system. Maybe it's a little bit deeper, but these are all things that we hope to explore going forward. And then with respect to gold, if you see where the Mall Lake nickel occurrence is on this particular map, what was Golden Band, the Bingo Gold Mine, it was renamed to Roy Lloyd. That is just immediately to the southeast. And now we're coming into the Larange Greenstone Belt. So, one of the interesting things, and I mentioned that Gochager Lake is extremely well endowed with respect to metals. The property is sort of straddling what is the Rottenstone Domain and the Larange Greenstone Belt. So anytime you can get a break, a strong linear change in geology, these are going to develop into prospective targets. So this orogenic belt that occurred 1.8 billion years ago, there was multiple phases of collisions, and it's at these boundaries where you get things like VMS deposits and magmatic nickel sulfide deposits and orogenic gold. So again, we're paying attention to gold, and potentially we don't have to look very far to find gold within our current dispositions. Do you want to ask any questions directly on this?
No, I mean, I think that if I may, in just 1 second here, I do you have one moment here? I was thinking about, I just have a couple of, I liked having a side by side here. I might just steal your screen sharing, and maybe we can, if we're really good at this, we can swap it back and forth here a little bit. But I just wanted to ask you more. I mean, obviously, I think anybody who's followed this story knows that you're very rigorous with your geological work. And I think that that's never really necessarily in doubt from people. I think if I,
Oh, perfect.
there, you can see that all right? Yeah. So there's a side by side for people, right? Just so there you can see, I've just been cobbling things together from news releases, right? So here's Gochager, due south. I mean, there's Ramp, here's Rottenstone or Albert Lake, and then Friesen Lake over here, and then Gochager. And never to diminish the critical importance of that, but I think that maybe, if I'm going to guess, people probably have questions that are maybe less geologically inclined. Maybe just, if we stay on the topic of just the land staking, you did sort of touch into it, or kind of, but maybe I'll ask you more directly, and maybe try to get you to do it more to the point. Just explain the logic, right? Why? I mean, you already have, like you said, a very large land package, which I think, you've ably demonstrated has potential for nickel, and then magmatic sulfides has a potential for gold. Is there a risk, and maybe the blunt question is there a risk of maybe sort of diluting your ability to engage with these projects meaningfully, right? You do have prospective land, and I agree with you, the under exploration, but is this elephant getting too big for Fathom, so to speak? Or what's the logic there for additional staking?
That's a good question, really good question. And I'm glad you brought it up. Staking is relatively cheap in Saskatchewan. I think the rate is, I think it's 60 cents a hectare when you go online and start staking claims. With the money that we have raised since being public, 2021, the vast majority of that money has gone into the exploration. And so as we file our assessments, for instance, the core land package around the historic Rottenstone mine, we're in good standing there for the next 10 years. So there's no risk of losing that land. And so we're not doing this, this additional staking without that in mind. And currently at Gochager, bumping it up from 23 now to 34,000 hectares, this new land is contiguous. We're going to be able to spread our dollars onto these new grounds and have increasing assessment credits so that we can maintain these lands in good standing. And one of the challenges at the Albert Lake project, being 90,000 hectares, is how do we funnel money that we've spent in the northern part of the property down to the southern part of the property, and through the Mars system and through grouping procedures, we're able to, if you can sort of envision a trail of continuous mineral dispositions, we can spread those funds and get them down to the very, very bottom end. And we haven't submitted yet the work that we did at Albert Lake South last summer. That is going in for assessment credits. That wasn't it wasn't a terribly expensive program, but that will be able to lock up a bit more time and keep things in good standing. Friesen Lake, we staked that, 10,000 plus hectares there. Saskatchewan allows you a free year with respect to having to do the exploration, but in year 2, you have to submit your 10,000 hectares times $15 per hectare times 2 to keep that keep those mineral dispositions in good standing. So I hope I've answered that question, Matthew. It's just big is good for us because, I'm going to go off on another tangent here. As we continue to engage with people and we're not going to be the miners. We're very optimistic we're going to find resources at Gochager and the Albert Lake project, but we're not going to be the miners. And so as we continue to engage with people that we hope to bring in at some point in the development of these projects, the discussions are ongoing. They like scale. And I read something recently here that one of the in Canada, in a lot of ways, has been well prospected, and it's difficult for larger companies to come in and take big land packages because the juniors have got the land. Part of our strategy is to have a significant land package.
And then maybe and I don't expect you to sort of break out the nitty gritty, agonizing detail of Saskatchewan staking and claim system and going through Mars, et cetera. But what is you kind of talked about it, right? The keeping claims in good standing, and what's your annual carrying costs for your land package as is?
Well, the rules allow you, and don't have it right at my fingertips here, Matthew, but I think years 1 through 7, and I'm going to go back into my Mars book and look at this after we're finished here. It's $15 per hectare needs to be spent annually to keep your claims in good standing. And that bumps up to $25 a hectare after the 7th year. And there are dispositions at the Albert Lake project. We're now into that $25 bracket per hectare. So what are we at now? We're 100 and, with the additional, we're up around 130, 140,000 hectares. So if you want to do back of the envelope math, 130,000 times 15, that's what it costs us to keep the land package in good standing year after year. But again, with the rules as they are in Saskatchewan, you're allowed to group and you are allowed to bank excess expenditures, which gets drawn down the following renewal date. So, our strategy here too has been very, very cognizant of that so that we're not in danger of losing these lands. And I got to give my geologist that works with me, Adam, all the credit here, because he's an absolute wizard of going in there and figuring out how we can group. And then we present it to Mars and it's click, click, click. And then we just wait for the pending assessment.
So yeah, there is again, not to get into the nitty gritty detail that would require, like you say, having the manual in front of you, so to speak, but there is the ability to spread out expenditures, and to sort of, call it a shell game, but that ability to sort of, spread things out and share things out so that the money you've spent elsewhere can be kind of credited to other land packages. Is that what you're kind of saying? Yeah, okay.
Correct. Yeah.
No, awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's sort of that the longer term concern of not being able to afford these is pretty minimal for the foreseeable future. Well, then why don't we skip over to just the VTEM Plus survey, right? And again,
Yeah.
I've got this little thing cobbled together. So again, maybe just again, I'll forego questions right now, and I'll just ask you to maybe just discuss. I mean, so here we are now looking at this inset here, right? Proposed VTEM survey extent. So here we are. There's ramp. There's the Rodenstone deposit. So down south here by about 20, 25 kilometers as the crow flies is where this inset is here, right? So you can see that if you're following. So this would be kind of the ramp land immediately surrounding it. So Ian, yeah, why don't you just walk us through, this was last week or so, or yeah, precisely a week ago. Maybe just, yeah, walk us through this news release briefly, and I'll have a couple of follow-up questions for you after that as well.
Okay, well, yeah, here again, it's just us paying attention to what's going on in the region. I've worked with Geotech, I've worked with the VTEM system on various other projects in Canada, and I reached out and I said to a colleague of mine there, I said, it's something that we're pondering, and do you mind putting together a proposal, which they've done, and so we have that. We have a proposal in front of us. And, the idea, the logic here is, I guess with the, obviously the Ranger 001 caught everybody's attention with respect to, I would argue there is not necessarily a geophysical signature per se, certainly not a conductive geophysical signature associated with the Ranger 001 gold mineralization. But what really caught my attention was the drill holes in the rush, which is going to be in this image that Matthew has on the screen here. So it's just going to be off to the very, very southwest corner of this insert. It's within 2.5 kilometers of the boundary that we share with Ramp Metals. So, here again, I mean, they had some surface outcrops, and it did have all the signals of a VMS type of setting, and it was conductive, and that would be a function of the chalcopyrite hosted within the pyrrhotite that was in their core photos. And I think I could make out the sphalerite in those core photos. But, the zinc is not going to give you a conductor. The chalcopyrite will, and the pyrrhotite will. And so that was, everything runs northeast, southwest in this part of Saskatchewan. So, it kind of makes sense that potentially that trend will move on to our very, very southern end of the Albert Lake property that we're calling Albert Lake South. Maybe I'll just briefly touch on the underlying image here, which is the total magnetic intensity that resulted from our gradient magnetometer survey that we flew in 2021. 95% of the 90,000 hectares was covered by this gradient mag survey. And, you can see that there's definitely some structural complexity in the mag. Again, slap me if I get too far along here as the geologist, Matthew, but when you're looking for gold, you need to look for structural complexity. And I look at these, north-south trending lineaments. I look at these extreme magnetic gradients where you go from the very bright colors to the very low colors. That's indicative of a change in rock type. And you can certainly see the swirling here. There's all sorts of indications of fold hinges, fold noses. And so we dropped our guys down there last August and said, just go and smash every single rock outcrop that you come across, and let's send it off for analysis, and which we did. The 2.68 grams per ton, that was the result of a check assay on something that came back initially at 0.9 grams per ton. And then I threw in another 6 or 7 samples of, I took the top 5, and then I threw in a low grade flyer and had them all redone at the lab, and they all came back at par with the exception of the 0.9 bumped up to 2.7. So that the fact that it was a check assay is more evidence that there is gold lurking. But what is the control? I mean, it's just too early to tell right now. I've had people ask me, well, why haven't you drilled this 2.7? And my simple response is, well, if you were to drill it, which way would you drill it? So there's more work to be done down here. And when we do the VTEM survey at some point, hopefully we can get around to doing that this summer, it will add another layer of valuable information, certainly with VMS style of mineralization in mind. But it would also give us the ability to do a little further deeper dive in a structural interpretation, which will complement the existing mag. And with VTEM, you not only do you get the conductivity measurements, but you're going to get mag as well. So we'll get another brand new mag set. So it just makes sense. Again, paying attention to what's going on to the south of us. Our 2.7 is 14 kilometers along strike of the Ranger 1 drill hole. The Ranger 1 is 7.5, 8 kilometers from the southern boundary. So we're waiting to see what develops with respect to gold mineralization at ramp, and cognizant of potential VMS style mineralization running onto the Albert Lake South jurisdiction. You're muted, Matthew.
Thanks, Ian. No, rookie mistake there. Eh? So no, I think that's good, right? That ability to sort of advance things, and like you say, with cognizant of what your neighbors are doing, the ability to advance projects, but while you kind of wait for definitive news. But I mean, maybe I'll ask, and I say this. I mean, I'm in Regina, 700 kilometers due south of your neck of the woods up there, in Rottenstone and Gochager, and I mean, I think last week my understanding was Saskatchewan had the worst air quality in the world from the fires up there. And if you have people, you can go up on Google Maps. Actually, Google Maps has a pretty good data layer where they show you active fire footprints. So you can kind of go up and verify that, yeah, there actually are quite large fires very close to Mississippi and very close to L'Orange. But maybe, so that in mind, right, there's going to be questions around scheduling and timing. And of course, giant, multi-kilometer long wildfires out of control. It's a bit of a wild card to try to deal with, but I will still ask though, right? I mean, so step one, what's the cost of this, right? You're engaging with these guys with geotech. It's a process that is continuing and will occur, but not finalized. But can you maybe give a little bit of detail on I'll ask you about kind of costing and then the schedule anticipated. I mean, ideal, and then maybe realistic with regard to the fire situation up there. And I'll stop there because I won't overload you. But yeah, just kind of the nitty gritty practical aspects of this. What will this cost you, and sort of a timeline as to when this survey would be occurring?
Yeah, well, we're looking at scenarios based on the line spacings. So sort of at the high end, we're looking about a $240,000 spend to complete this survey. And there are other interested parties are looking to fly the VTEM system in their own properties in this particular area. I haven't talked to my colleague at Geotech because they did have a system sitting in L'Orange anticipating there was going to be potentially a few surveys flying out of Mississippi, which if that comes together and if we have, 3 individual companies flying their independent surveys, us included, out of Mississippi, that will sort of have an effect on the demob costs. So potentially this cost will come down. But I do know the water bomber facility at the L'Orange Airport was demolished by the fire. Apparently, no aircraft have been damaged. So I'm not sure if, I've just been leaving people alone because of the situation up there. So I'm not sure if Geotech got their systems out of there ahead of the danger of the oncoming fire. But yeah, so timing, in a perfect world, Matthew, there's 3 or 4 people saying, hey, I'm in, and things have all settled down and Mississippi airstrip becomes very, very active. And this thing gets flown at some point during the summer, which if, positive, again, I'd like to see what happens to the south of us. And on the assumption of positive news coming and we pull the trigger to do this survey, the next step would be to get people on the ground and follow up on what we would call our, you tend to rank all these recommendations, and then we would, as we did last year, drop some people out on a fly camp and do the prospecting and ground truthing of various geophysical signatures.
And then I'll ask, so sometime in the summer, if things work out well and there's not sort of catastrophic damage that is waiting to be uncovered, which sounds like no. You were telling me some pretty everyday Saskatchewan heroics going on up there for people saving towns with their work, building fire breaks, etc. Just random citizens, pretty well, darkly inspiring or something, right? Or dark inspiration in the darkness. Anyway, I won't get too stuck on that. But when assuming, let's say, totally made up date, August 1st, it's being flown. What's the typical or expected turnaround by the time you would get that data, collated, analyzed, and then maybe published for people to see?
That's a good question. And typically this can happen pretty fast. We'll have one of our own people vet the data as well as they do their own vetting of the data. And as things are progressing, we get a peak of the progress, and there will be a period of time. The survey itself could probably be done in, I've got it in the contract. I just have to look at it again, but no more than, all things being equal, good weather, low winds, this thing could get knocked off in probably 3 days. So in terms of they're doing their final processing of the data, and then they put out their logistics report. And then if I ask, they will have their own people do a deeper dive into a detailed report. But with our own people in-house, we can come up with a preliminary map fairly quickly. I would say within 10 days of completion of the survey, if not less, we could have a pretty cursory look at what's developing, which would engage us in terms of, okay, that allow us to start planning a potential field program down there at South Albert Lake towards the end of the summer, if things play out as we would like them to here.
Well, and then I kind of have two final questions here, not to belabor this point too much, but I think both are probably valid enough to get included here. But I guess, you talked about people asking you, why haven't you drilled the 2.7 gram sample yet? And this is, data layering, right? That I think people always underestimate the sort of iterative and reiterative nature of exploration, that there's a lot of work that you're going around in circles a bit in terms of adding data, building data, refining your model, etc. So that with that in mind, geophysical surveys, even boots on the ground work. Let's assume, like you say, that ramp, and it comes back and there's, some pretty compelling evidence that it was worth your time and energy to divert down there too. How much work is involved from here assume the VTEM Plus gets done, assume that ramp comes back with positive news that kind of forces your hand in terms of casting your eyes southward. How much work is left down there before you think you would say it's drill ready, or at least parts of it?
Well, we could potentially position ourselves if the processes that you just talked about, winter drilling would be a reality. This is, we're kind of stuck right smack in the middle. Mississippi is here and our Albert Lake camp is here, and the distance is almost, it's a little shorter from Rottenstone, and we've had that discussion internally. Is okay, well, it'd have to be a helicopter. Would we just base again out of Rottenstone and fly the 40 kilometers one way to get down to the area, the bottom end of the property? So that gets really expensive, and everything we're doing at Gochager is to divorce ourselves as best we can from reliance on helicopters. Because that just eats your budget. Helicopter is now more expensive than drilling. And it used to be, it was just a little bit below drilling, and then it was at par, and now it's over here on the other side. So we've got to be very, very cognizant of the cost involved in drilling, helicopter supported drilling, because fuel costs are just continue to go up, and more so than ever, I think the insurance costs in the helicopter industry is just continuing to climb. So it makes it very, very expensive. So that logistics would be a big part of it, Matthew. It doesn't make any sense for us to just, okay, well, we've got some positive field results. The VTEM and MAG that we have is sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. I don't think we would be in a position where we'd want to establish a camp down at the southern end. So we would look more than likely of running out of the Rottenstone camp, and it would be a winter program at the earliest.
Yeah, so there is a sort of a reasonable timeline that in a world where all those boxes get checked in the meantime, that you are able to, in that time period, you're able to have a relatively short turnaround in terms of getting a drill down there if results demand it, so to speak.
And then, sorry, Matthew, I'm just going to, as we,
please.
On my long list of to-do list, our current exploration permit at Albert Lake is coming up for renewal. So I'm currently working on that. And in light of the activity down at the south, I will rejig things slightly to bring the southern part of the property into play as a potential area of drilling within this new permit that I am going to be renewing.
And then I'll end it here and I'll move on from here. But just my question is, this shaded subsection here, where this is your smash and grab tour that you did, as you can see, there's your 2.7 and your some of your anomalous results here. What was the logic in choosing this area, right? I mean, if from a total, ignorant layman, I see a fold nose here potentially, right? Or other interesting sort of features that I see, but of course I'm just a schmuck, so I don't pretend to know, right? But I mean, what was the logic? Was it maybe just ease of access? You talk about just sort of being able to do things with a degree of affordability that chose this, or what was the logic behind this region kind of being the focus of your smash and grab tour there?
Yeah, well, that's another good question. I'm glad you brought that up because it was, again, while this was happening, we were building the Gochager Lake camp, and I decided the expediter, he would boxed everything up and he was slinging the boxes directly to the campsite at Gochager as opposed to flying everything in and then taking it from the dock 100 meters up the hill to where the camp is. So we had a helicopter, and we decided, okay, initially I wanted to put the crew in there, by a float plane. So we were looking for a lake that was long enough and safe enough to land an airplane on in this particular area down towards the south of the property. And as we looked at lakes, we went, well, no, we're not going to get a turbo water in there. And no, that one's not going to work. And eventually we decided on this particular area because there was a lake, we need water when you've got people in a fly camp. And it was in an area that we thought, we like that fold nose that you see there and the northwest trending fault that rips right through there. And you can see that, there is an argument to be made that the 0.17 and the 2.6 is in close proximity to that northwester. So that came into play so it was kind of 50-50 logistics and 50-50 structural complexity based on our mag.
Excellent. So I think I will transition then. This is sort of, we're literally inching closer and closer on the map and in the conversation here. Maybe we will transition just to actually kind of, ramp and the gold story here, right? Fathom Nickel with this sort of gold wild card, right? And so, ramp, obviously you mentioned with Russian Ranger, and obviously anyone in this room is probably familiar with this. I guess there's a large grab bag of questions from people that maybe you've heard before. I think it's still important to talk about these in public with people too, right? But I guess, if we start from the, ramp comes back with negatives, that kind of answers your question for you. You keep focusing on nickel, right? But what with ramp's imminent assays, and again, I know that we have touched on this, but we'll kind of focus down and use this as a launch pad to discuss further questions. But let's say they come back with, unquestionably positive results, so to speak. Yeah, does that, and this could be a short answer, but does that force your hand to sort of at that point transition to pursuing gold more primarily, or what's your feelings on that?
No, I don't like the word transition, Matthew. I would say gold exploration becomes part of the fold, and it potentially is a catalyst for us to be able to pursue our focus in addition to, that might be a bit of a pipe dream. That might be me just being overly optimistic, but no, I don't like the word transition. I like to think, the vast majority of my experience is gold, and I like to think I'm pretty good at it. I've got some mines into production. I found some gold deposits, one of which is in production in Colombia right now. So it's something again, not to use the word transition, but I think it becomes the fold. It becomes part of Fathom Nickel. Just because we call it nickel doesn't mean we can't look for gold. It'll be part of the strategy going forward, and Doug and I are going to have to figure out a way how we do that. And that probably is the biggest stumbling block is how do we do that? But in a perfect world, I say we just add it to the fold and include it in our exploration.
Yeah, but there would come a time where positive results would force your hand. I mean, there obviously is such an appetite for gold, like you said, $3,500 gold. It's hard to ignore, and you know, the medium term and long term sort of bullishness of nickel notwithstanding. Obviously, nickel is where it is right now. Yeah, that there will be a point though that there is that success will sort of force your hand to, as you say, not transition. And I know you've got the resume to back that up, but it's not some sort of just kind of chasing mania, so to speak. But yeah, there will come a point that success to the south will dictate strategy. So shall we say?
Yeah. Short answer, yes.
And then maybe,
So,
yeah. Well, why don't we? I mean, so have you? And so I'm getting into sort of the user questions here, but have you discussed teaming up with Ramp in any sort of fashion, right? Whether it's sharing infrastructure or a more formal sort of JV or something. Has there any been sort of conversations in terms of pairing with them?
I haven't had any conversations with them. It's been a while, but there was some emails going back and forth where we discussed the possibility of collaborating on the logistical side of things. You know, the one, yeah, I mean, this was just sort of a thought was, okay, well, look, you know, in the period of time where we're not using it at camp, would it make sense to have somebody else using it? It would be good for our expediter, but there's potentially some complications there because they'd be processing their core on our property with our facility, and they would have to get the core off our property and store it somewhere else. So there are a few sort of the logistical things that might have to get sorted out. But no, I mean, I'd be open to collaborating on logistics, and you know, I think they're kind of in a wait and see mode too. I think, you know, they're I'm sure they're very, very optimistic. Some positive results are going to come of this, and that's going to determine their next move. And I think it was mentioned that they would be looking at establishing their own camp because that will have a significant impact on their overall cost per meter of drilling. So I think it's still early, Matthew. You know, as exciting as gold is right now with the price, and as exciting as the Ranger One intersection is, we got to let this unfold a bit here. You know, it's still very early. It's still very, very early. There's assays pending, and I credit them for sampling everything top to bottom and cutting it all in half and sending that all to the lab, because gold is gold. It's going to pop up in the strangest places. But that takes a lot of time. We're I don't know when assays are going to be coming out, but it's not going to be anytime too soon, I don't think, because of what's been involved with having to get all that core prepped for the lab. And I think in their last release, they mentioned something about getting everything south to Prince Albert. So that would have slowed down the process as well. So again, I think it's just a little bit early here to have those sorts of discussions. But again, results could very much change the playing field here.
Yeah, let the data points sort of collect themselves before you make any more larger or more more critical decisions, I guess. I mean, there are questions from here which I think, again, people are asking about how do you communicate that, how do you balance the narratives of nickel versus gold, you know, how do you focus on one over the other for just practical reasons. And I guess if you wanted to respond to that, I'll give the opportunity, but I think kind of what you just said is that it's such early days, that degree of theory crafting. I mean, I know people want to hear it because, yeah, gold is exciting, and 7.5 meters of 70 grams grabs you by the lapels and kind of slaps you in the face a little bit. But you know, if like I said, you have the opportunity and discuss it as you will, but maybe those more sort of, yeah, we're theory crafting or hypothesizing maybe a bit too far in the future. But if you wanted to just touch on that stuff, I guess tangentially, even I'll let you have the floor here.
Yeah. With again, is it the same sort of question, Matthew? Or I'm not
yeah,
quite sure.
just well, yeah, I wasn't sure. I wanted to make sure not to give you not to have me to speak for you. No, you have the opportunity to discuss things. I guess the questions of how do you communicate gold, or how do you market it as a nickel company? How do you make sure the market is aware of the gold feature? You know, is this like a spin out, or is this a name change? Like I say, those are the questions that were coming up, which you can of course understand why people want to hear it. But is it yeah, again, not to answer for you, but just it's still too hypothetical to go down that road.
It's early in my mind. I think it would be irresponsible at this point because we don't know enough. But that being said, if the opportunity arises and we look at a spin out, we can form a subsidiary company. I mean, these are discussions Doug and I have every single week as to, you know, the what ifs, the looking forwards, and you know, how do we get creative in terms of attracting new money, and something positive results here to the south could very much be a catalyst that will, again, I'm not going to use the word transition, but you know, Doug and I can get creative, and maybe there is a you know, a subsidiary, and all the shareholders get dividend shares in Newco, and you know, these sorts of things are discussions that are always ongoing. We're always thinking of these things, Matthew, but at you know, at the same time, I mean, it's not an easy thing to be running a junior exploration company in challenging times, and so we're conscious of that, but at the same time, trying to look ahead as to the what if scenarios, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you take your shot, but don't rush your shot. Wait for your shot, right? Yeah. Well, I guess so. Yeah, I think that does kind of cover the gold aspect, considering we have discussed it previously in this conversation already. Maybe I'll ask you, you know, so just in terms of, I mean, people are obviously aware of the macro impact of nickel and I mean nickel juniors and financings, et cetera. But there obviously you can, again, these are questions coming from investors. You can no doubt appreciate people want to ask these questions, and I think that's their investors. That's definitely their right. But do you just want to discuss, you know, just the last 6 or 9 months, right? There were plans that were in place. They didn't happen. And I don't think we need anybody to, you know, we don't need to sit here and, you know, cry in our beer or whatever, right? But just, can you just kind of help people understand, you know, just what happened and why, and, you know, delays or, you know, issues with the financing, et cetera?
Yeah, well, let me touch on the financing, and I'm glad you brought this up because, yeah, it was, it was a choppy, somewhat difficult several months there for Fathom Nickel. The flow through financing, I mean, that's a piece of cake. Anybody can go out and raise flow through dollars. The challenging part is raising hard dollars, and in the initial financing, there's a time window in which you've got to get this thing done. We went past that time window, and the exchange came back to us and made us aware of that. So we had to do a few amendments, if you will, in the financing process with respect to timing and price. There were some other factors that came into that, you know, because of where we were trading, there's certain rules around what you can do your raise at. And so, you know, with our legal help, we got through those hurdles. And then, of course, we ran into Christmas, which is always a very, very difficult time. So we were able to close on some funds pre-Christmas, but we kept things open. And Doug and I were very, very active engaging with people outside of Canada. This is where the hard dollars tend to come from. And fortunately, our very, very good partner, Crescat Capital, stepped up. They said, look, we're going to take down a third. That was the impetus for other people to take place in the financing. So this process started in October. It ended in May, but we raised our $1.5 million, and a lot of it was hard, and a lot of it was hard dollars. So that was probably the biggest reason why we were you know, we were kind of quiet, is we were struggling to get the dough together. And also the other big factor here too, Matthew, as I mentioned earlier, logistics, divorcing ourselves from helicopter dependency. I initiated the process of applying for a permit that would allow us to have permission with the folks that run the Roy Lloyd mine to go through their gate and north of that particular gold mine, navigate our way north to a lake and then west onto existing trails that were used back in the mid 1960s to get into Gochager. And then there was a very, very brief period, 1989, 1990 in the winter, where a couple more holes were drilled. So those trails still exist. And so we put in this permit application, we gave them the route. And then while I was at the open house there in Saskatoon, you were there, Matthew, I had the good fortune of running into one of the regional stakeholders, and I had a beer and a lunch with him, and he said, look, my cabin's here. I've got this trail and that trail. Feel free to use that trail. So I did another quick amendment to the permit to utilize some of these trails that were in existence. Long story short, by the time it got to the Lac La Ronge Indian Band for the duty to consult process. It was now January. They had 60 days to express any concerns. So January, February, we're coming into March, and the window of opportunity was 31st to potentially mobilize equipment into the property. And I didn't get the permit approved until the first week of April, at which point ice is starting to candle, and there was just no way I was going to take the risk of running any equipment into the Gochager Lake project. And, the ideal situation would have been we would have had a good chunk of our money raised by Christmas. Permit was going to be in place sometime in January, February. We'd be able to move a drill onto the site, stop at the Mall Lake nickel occurrence, drill a couple of holes, do the borehole, carry on, and park the equipment at Gochager. But that didn't come to fruition. Financing was challenging. Permit didn't happen as quickly as I had hoped it had happened, but it is in place now. So we're going to spend a little bit of time this summer marking out our trail north of the Roy Lloyd mine, and then walking the existing trail, and we'll be ready to go. Hopefully, if it's a good winter and things get really stiff early, we'll be moving fuel into the Gochager Lake property overland as opposed by helicopter.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's the ability to reduce that helicopter dependency. Yeah, the ability to actually get those trails cut would be positive. Obviously, there are people that, again, from the perspective of shareholders, this is, I think, they're pretty understandable sort of emotions or questions. But people, there's a degree of some of the questions they got. There's a degree of kind of frustration, or, they felt that there was maybe, it's that classic thing where it's, even if things going right or wrong, is that the communication of them and making things predictable. People are maybe wondering about questions about trust, right? You just want to touch on, that sort of it's the question about how and why and should and why and to what reason or whatever, that establishment of trust that people need to have to put their money into a company. Do you just want to discuss just from that angle, kind of that approach?
Yeah, no, I get that, Matthew. Again, we like to put out news when we're putting out news relative to advancing of the projects. So as I said, it was a bit choppy there. We had to put some money in the bank, and we had some struggles with the financing. So there wasn't a lot of news other than very annoying announcing the financing, announcing the various amendments to the financing. The close date kept getting pushed ahead for various reasons. So I understand the frustration there. Before we got on air here, Matthew, I was telling you about, I have another phone conversation this afternoon with a shareholder, and I had a couple of very, very extensive phone conversations with shareholders last week. I would encourage any of the listeners out there, if, I will say this, that, we are true to our word that we are a lean and mean exploration company, and we're a two-person outfit, and we're take great pride in doing things properly and honestly. And I would encourage anybody just to pick up the phone, give me a call. And, this is the one conversation I had last week when I looked at my watch and went, shit, it's been an hour and a half. But, it was a lot of fun. And I like to think that at the end of that conversation, the individual was, well, okay, I feel a little bit better about things now. These, we've dabbled in the, how do you market your company? How do you market your story? And I get bombarded with various outfits that are saying, well, we can do this and we can do that. And one of my to-do list is, I've got a list of about 9 or 12 different outfits, and, and just try and weigh the pros and cons of the various approaches that they're presenting. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, Matthew, is it's difficult for somebody else to tell our story the way we want it to be told. And if you go the route of a marketing outfit, it costs a lot of money. So we're trying to avoid these things. We haven't had, we've dabbled in a few different ways of doing this, and some have been successful and some not so much so. So I guess my point at the end of the day is, if people want to know what's going on with Fathom Nickel, call Ian Fraser, call Doug Porter. It's as simple as that.
And yeah, phone numbers are at the bottom of the news release, right? So I think that's fair enough, right? Accessibility. Yeah, no, fair. I think that's one of those things where it's just the mechanics of the market, and sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's hard, and we all are optimists eternally. I think you have to be in this game, but yeah, reality has a funny habit of getting in the way sometimes. So why don't we so why don't we talk cash and next raise, rollback, that sort of thing, right? Because that's again sort of the insane sort of truth of this sector is there's always another financing coming, right? But how much cash have you got? Have you got the money to do the VTEM survey as is right now? How much after that point? What's in the kitty right now for you?
Yeah, well, we with this raise, we've allocated dollars to do the field work at Gochager Lake. The VTEM survey, that was something that came after we had, drawn up our budget. So we to answer the short answer to that is yes, we do have the funds to do it. We would be, again, I think we're waiting on things to unfold, and it may, there's not a lot of wiggle room in that 1.5 million that we raised. Is the point I'm trying to make. With positive results at Gochager, we're very much focused on these soil geochemical anomalies 1.5 kilometers to the east of the historic deposit within this corridor. We're going to do some geophysics. We anticipate there will be a very, very strong conductor associated with that. Ideally, we would like to put some drill holes into that this fall. That would require a small raise. We would like to think that if this thing develops into a body of massive sulfides comparable to what Talon announced, and you see how they responded in the market, and that is a company that has 900 million shares outstanding. So good nickel results appear to get reflected in the market. So, perfect scenario here, and this is always a moving target, but we do a small raise. I would have to fly a drill in this fall by helicopter. It would be a small program, 3 holes. Just want to see what's in this anomaly. And if it's positive to the extent of a Talon-like intersection, well, then I think we're at the game change stage there. We've demonstrated that this corridor is going to host multiple deposits of nickel, copper, cobalt in varying styles of mineralization. And that would trigger what we hope is a mechanism to fund a 10 to 15,000 meter drill program at Gochager Lake commencing in January of 2026. With that drill, that I'm in discussions with a local in Larange that has a drill, and if he has trust in us and he's comfortable leading the drill for the bigger and better program starting in January, if everything falls into place, that's how I see things going forward. And maybe if things are very, very positive to the south at ramp, it would renew our enthusiasm to get this VTEM thing done as quickly as possible. We'll figure out a way to do that. And that may change, as we were discussing earlier, it could not alter. I'm going to say it's going to add to exploration we'll want to do before the snow flies. And on the question of rollbacks, Matthew, you brought that up, and if I had a nickel, no pun intended, for every time I've been asked that question, when are you going to roll back? Our answer to that question is the only reason we would roll back, do a consolidation of our share structure, is if it was tied to a significant event that involved significant dollars. Because there's absolutely no point of reducing your shares. The market cap stays the same, and you run the risk of going right back to 5 cents. Mm-hmm. And then people are really pissed off. Mm-hmm. And I hate to use the term, there are train wrecks out there where this has occurred and shareholders have not benefited. I mentioned the 900 million shares outstanding with Talon. There was acquisitions in this space done with junior companies that had significant debt. Fathom has no debt. and their share count was north of 700 million. I think I said 1,000 before. So 700 million shares outstanding. So we're cognizant of it. We're trying to be as careful as possible. We're doing our damnedest to get us out of this rut that we're in at 3.5 to 5 cents. But to answer the question on the rollbacks, it's got to be tied to something of significance.
Yeah, I think that's me covering this space, that's sort of the evergreen answer, is that if you don't have the news to buttress that, then there's no point, because the bleeding just begins anew, right? It just that many more pennies for people to shave off. I mean, people go look at Abra Silver. I think it's probably actually a year ago now, but they, larger company and more advanced projects, but they did their rollback, but they tied it to very positive JV news and didn't even impact the market, right? So I think that's the evergreen answer to rollbacks. And this is just me editorializing, Ian. Sorry, it's that the only time it's worthwhile, and the only time it was effective, is when you have that objectively, positive and defining news, right? And there's no point doing it till then, because it's just you'll just keep bleeding. So that's my 2 cents anyway. Like you say, if you had a nickel for a day, but yeah, I talked about that. I guess, what was I going to ask you? Shucks, it was a follow-up question there. Anyway, no. So we talked about cash. We talked about maybe I'll stick this one in for FSM Fusion there, Saskatoon guy, if I'm not mistaken. But he just wants to know more about Friesen Lake, right? And so this is harkening back to a little bit earlier here when you talked about the sort of the northeast southwest trends. Where does Friesen Lake fit in with this, right? Does that get on the map with the Rush VMS info? Is this suddenly sort of like a kind of a backdoor VMS? Like you obviously took it for nickel at the time, right? But does this sort of get backdoored into potential for that VMS style stuff that's potentially happening?
Yeah, short answer to that is yes. I mean, I've a little bit of history with the Friesen Lake project. I was down there with Dr. Colin Dunn. I think it was 1999 or 2000, and we were down there trying to orient ourselves with respect to some of the historic drilling that was done in the surface trenching. So it is. I mean, there's an ultramafic body there that has some nice platinum kicks in it, actually. So that is why we staked it, because we knew if we didn't grab it, somebody was going to grab it in light of the Ranger 1 results. So I've got to get some assessment work done there. I'm not in a position right now where we would fly a VTEM survey over that. But what we have going for us here, there is some Friesen Lake core stored in the Orange Core Library, which is currently closed because of the fires. So when we move our guys up there, Adam's got the PXRF, and he'll be able to get in there and look at some of this historic drill core that's available. And we'll look at it obviously with the nickel eyes on, but we'll also look at it for VMS signals and what have you. Yeah, so I guess to answer that question, it is a crucial piece of land in this land package that we're continuing to develop. And I think the first step is access the Orange Core Library. Adam is planning a program where we'll get out there and do some orientation, find the trenches, if fortunate, find where some of the old drill holes were, get them zapped into the GPS so we know where things are, and then just start that process of you use the term layering the data to get us into a position where we de-risk the drilling, which ultimately needs to come.
I remember the thing that I wanted to say to people, again, this is just me editorializing. I'm trying to make sure that I ask the questions and Ian answers them, but that, the Talon and Power Nickel, now Power Metals, I mean, there's proof positive that even in this sort of tough atmosphere for nickel, that, I mean, I know that Power Metals or Power Nickel there is, as it's a very much a polymetallic thing at this point, but nickel magmatic sulfide remains still like a tier 1 discovery potential in terms of interest from the market, despite kind of nickel's struggles lately, right? I mean, Talon Metals you're talking about, I mean, yeah, though they added $150-200 million to their market cap. Now that's back down to $100 million. In the last 6 months, they've put $100 million on their market cap, and go look at Power Nickel and their ticker too, right? In terms of what success with high grade nickel can bring, right? So there still is that sort of very tantalizing large sort of grand prize still just sort of lurking, right? But maybe I'm going to ask just a question around, sorry, excuse me. Just this one's from Randy. And so he's asking, this as a question that was on my list anyway, so I'll just give him credit for it anyway. But, just the prospects of JVing or some sort of partnership, whether it be on the nickel front or on the gold front. I mean, obviously if there's CAs and it hasn't been announced, you can't just come out and tell us everything, because that's the whole point of material info. But I mean, can you discuss just as best you can conversations that have been had, or just the avenues of that in terms of partnering for nickel or gold?
Yeah, well, there is a CEA in place with respect to gold on the Albert Lake project. So that is in place and discussions continue, but I think we're, collectively in a bit of a wait and see attitude here as to what's going to develop here. And that's going to be the impetus for additional conversations and things going forward. On the nickel front, we have had discussions with Teck. We've had discussions with Glencore. We've had discussions with Wyloo. We've had discussions with some Australian-based companies that, nickel kind of fell off the map in Australia, but it's starting to come back again. And I think we could go on for hours about the laterite nickel situation in Indonesia. So I think there is a little bit of a bit of a wait and see attitude on some of these bigger companies because of you can see that they're shifting a little bit their own balance sheets and their directions that they're going. There's talks of mergers, Anglo with Rio, and all these things are kind of changing the landscape a little bit. But we continue to engage with these people, and several of them have said, let's have another conversation as soon as you run your geophysics over top of those prominent soil geochemical anomalies at Gochager Lake. And if we, are able to raise a few bucks and you got to be good to be lucky. If we have some luck and we nail a home run, guess what? Those conversations are going to immediately pick back up again. And we'll figure out a way to fund this 10 to 15,000 meter drill program.
Excellent. Well, no, I will take a second here. I've got a few questions, obviously, in the chat here I've been fitting in. We are just in the last couple minutes here. Classic Matthew and Ian conversation at the 77-minute mark here. But so I appreciate it.
I have a lunch break.
That's lots of people have tuned in, obviously. But no, so I guess the final kind of package of content or questions or just a large question I'll just leave to you. And again, knowing that you've touched on this throughout, but we'll kind of deal with it in its own kind of discrete package here. But what's next? What's the timeline here, right? That right now our understanding is that you've got the cash for VTEM Plus, you have the cash to get that kind of going down there. You are hoping to kind of have a small drill campaign late fall to springboard into a larger one. But can you just give us, what's the timeline of events from here till, to say end of year, next 6 months, so to speak, in terms of what that balance between realistic and practical and sort of hopeful blue sky if things kind of break your way, like you say, get a little lucky to be good and good to be lucky.
Yeah, well, there will be some news flow, Matthew. I'm in constant communication with our good friends in L'Orange as to when it's going to be go time. We'll get that figured out here in the next 10 days. So we'll make an announcement that we are going into the field, and I didn't want to include exactly what we're doing in today's news release. I thought we could save that for another day. A little bit of explanation around what we're going to do and why, and then those results we're going to be collecting. I'm going to guess when it's all said and done, it'll be north of 3,000 individual soil samples. And that's not necessarily sexy news, but there will be results that come of that, along with, the prospecting where we've got this figured out. We can smash chips off individual outcrops and zap it with the PXRF, and it'll tell us if we're in the variable textured gabbro or not. So we'll be able to map out this variable textured gabbro, which is the quote unquote the container rock at Gochager. So there's potentially some news around that. The geophysics, again, things can be fairly instantaneous these days. So we'll be announcing the results of the summer program. If we feel that's going to be the catalyst to a small raise, they'll be announced there. We'll try and get some drill holes in before the weather gets really nasty. But again, we have the luxury of the camp now, so we can push that envelope out because we can still get picked up by a helicopter if we're in there in November, whereas you can't with a float plane. So yeah, so that's kind of the timeline of, possibly throw in the, if and when the VTEM happens. So that there will be some news with respect to field activities and exploration. And, we're constantly engaged with discussions of investors. We're constantly trying to spread the story out to new folks. A participant in this last financing was a group out of the Netherlands. So they've participated in the financing. So we're going to continue to get this story out to new people as best we can. And again, broken record here, but in the background, figuring out ways to raise significant dollars, minimizing the dilution as best we can, and just continue to push things forward.
And so just to, again, I apologize. I know that you articulated this previously and was trying to make sure I read it correct. It is almost kind of the same plan as was before, is that you get the rig in, drill a couple of holes at Mall Lake as you get it positioned to where you want it more longer term. And then, like you say, if we can get the chips to fall properly with the larger campaign to follow after that, is that a fair summation?
Yeah, well, no, the drilling would be at Gochager Lake. We're looking at that the geochem anomaly along strike. The fact that we have a camp now and we'll have a winter trail that goes directly through Mall Lake, I'm really anxious to stick a couple of holes into that. And that's something that we could potentially do overland and not dependent on the helicopter. And guys are just running back and forth on snow machines from camp down to Mall Lake. So that's in the works as well.
No, excellent. Well, no, I think that's, yeah. So, I mean, there you have it, folks. The Fathom Nickel they're up and running, and they've got their kind of, like I say, engines moving, and they're getting into gear here again. And yes, they've got a 6-month plan here, a little bit of watching eyes to the south for gold, and plans to get the drill turning, small, and then knock on wood after that a little bit larger. Ian, I guess, last call for questions here, people, but otherwise I'll let you just have the last chance to the last word here.
Yeah, well, again, Matthew, thank you for organizing this, and I enjoy this. I can't see the folk out there, but I know there are shareholders, and they've been riding it's not really a bump. It's been kind of one of these and that. And that's been frustrating for me included. I'm another question that constantly comes up is, how much skin have you got in the game? And Doug and I have made a cognizant effort to improve that scenario. There's a bit of a history while, we were major shareholders as a private company, but we had to do some sacrificing there. And it's been a bit of a catch-up process ever since. We feel the day-to-day pain, and we're doing whatever we can to get out of this. Unfortunately, when you get down to these levels, there's people making money on a half a cent gain, a 1 cent gain, and that's a dangerous place to be. Sorry, we ask for your trust and faith. We're gonna get out of this rut and demonstrate that Saskatchewan continues to be a fantastic place to look for not only base metals in the nickel, copper, cobalt, and also lead, zinc, copper, silver, and gold, orogenic gold. As I mentioned, just west of Brabant, I was involved with the discovery and the into production of the Comus gold mine. Man, when you see visible gold, there's really nothing quite like it. So it'd be fun to stumble across another gold opportunity as well.
No, excellent. And not to belabor it further, but if you go take a look at their salaries and go compare the market purchases and the financing participation, this is these guys aren't making $500,000 and putting in some sympathy money just to make it look good for the market. There's a very serious amount of money kind of on an annual basis that Ian and Doug are footing up, and that's what you want to see, right? So no, otherwise, yeah, great. Thanks for everyone who tuned in. There was 20 or 25 here at our peak. That's pretty darn good, I would say. And
that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Terrific.
Ian. Yeah,
thank you very much.
We'll talk soon, and good luck. Let's get some good news flowing, and we'll up and to the right. So, okay, thanks, Ian.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.